That's my last Duchess, painted on the wall, looking as if she were alive. I call that piece a wonder now. Frau Pandolf's hands worked busily a day, and there she stands. Will it please you sit and look at her? I said Frau Pandolf by design, for never read strangers like you that pictured countenance, the depth and passion of its earnest glance, but to myself they turned, since none puts by the curtain I have drawn for you but I, and seemed as if they would ask me, if they durst, how such a glance came there. So, not the first are you to turn and ask thus. Sir, 'twas not her husband's presence only called that spot of joy into the Duchess's cheek. Perhaps Frau Pandolf chanced to say, her mantle laps over my lady's wrist too much, or paint must never hope to reproduce the faint half-flush that dies along her throat. Such stuff was courtesy, she thought, and cause enough for calling up that spot of joy. She had a heart, how shall I say, too soon made glad, too easily impressed. She liked whate'er she looked on, and her looks went everywhere. Sir, 'twas all one, my favor at her breast, the dropping of the daylight in the west, the bough of cherries some officious fool broke in the orchard for her, the white mule she rode with round the terrace, all and each would draw from her alike the approving speech, or blush, at least. She thanked men, good, but thanked, somehow, I know not how, as if she ranked my gift of a 900-years-old name with anybody's gift. Who'd stoop to blame this sort of trifling? Even had you skill in speech, which I have not, to make your will quite clear to such an one, and say, just this or that in you disgusts me. Here you miss, or there exceed the mark, and if she let herself be lessoned so, nor plainly set her wits to yours, forsooth, and made excuse, e'en then would be some stooping, and I choose never to stoop. Oh, sir, she smiled, no doubt, whenever I passed her, but who passed without much the same smile? This grew. I gave commands. Then all smiles stopped together. There she stands, as if alive. Will it please you rise? We'll meet the company below, then. I repeat, the Count, your master's known munificence, is ample warrant that no just pretence of mine for dowry will be disallowed, though his fair daughter's self, as I avowed at starting, is my object. Nay, we'll go together down, sir. Notice Neptune, though, taming a seahorse, thought a rarity, which Claus of Innsbruck cast in bronze for me.
Robert Browning was a poet of the 19th century who wrote thousands of poems during his lifetime. Of those, perhaps his most famous is the poem that you have just read and listened to, My Last Duchess. I know that I read this poem as part of our literature class in high school, and I have no doubt that many other high schools presented the poem to their students as well. The poem is written in what's called the iambic pentameter, which is the style Shakespeare famously used for his plays and sonnets, those are poems, and which uses stressed and unstressed syllables in rotation through the line 5 times. Iambic refers to the stress and unstressed pairs, and pentameter refers to the 5 times the pattern repeats. Iambic pentameter goes a bit like a heartbeat. Bum, 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 bum. But in this poem, the sentence structure often carries on past a particular line, and this means that the lines themselves should not necessarily mark pauses. And the result is that the poem can be read as a conversation following the natural pauses provided by the punctuation within. The same goes for the rhymes. While every 2 lines of the poem make up what is called a couplet, a pair of rhyming lines, the rhymes do not necessarily come at the end of natural breaks in speech. On the whole, the poem can very much be recited as if it were a simple prose speech, with the rhyming and iambic pentameter adding flavor, but not overriding the dish, as it were. Poetry is one of the hardest literary formats to translate from one language to another, so I thought that many of you learning English might enjoy a taste of English poetry and might enjoy an analysis of this poem, written in plain English. The plan is to go basically sentence by sentence and discuss all the nuances Browning introduces into the story. Also, my goal isn't to get to the right conclusion. I'm going to treat this as if I'm someone entering in blind. We don't know what Browning is trying to say, so we'll try and figure it out in real time as we go along. Sometimes we might hit a dead end. That's the end of a street with no other exits, and have to reassess what we think is happening. Also, a brief note on what might have inspired the poem. There are some hints that Browning didn't make up the story out of whole cloth. The opening word, Ferrara, is likely a hint that this story is based upon the real life events surrounding the fifth Duke of Ferrara, Alfonso II of Este, and his wife, Lucrezia Medici, who died under mysterious circumstances. The reference to the Duke's 900-year-old name corresponds with the real-world age of the Este family, and the Medici at the time, though quite wealthy, were of a lesser nobility. Apparently, the Duke abandoned his wife only a few years after marrying her, and she died soon after under mysterious circumstances. Not long after that, he began chasing his second Duchess. So, that's sort of the background understanding that we have heading into the poem. Okay, let's start. The very first line goes,
"That's my last Duchess painted on the wall."
And we immediately know two things. The speaker's previous wife is gone, maybe dead, the obvious meaning. But we also see that the speaker doesn't seem to value the life of this woman. He doesn't speak with respect. She was just one in a potential line of duchesses that he might have had. That's just his last duchess. She was not a person. She was an object to be possessed. This very first line, then, tells us that the person speaking, the Duke, is one, not a good person, according to modern standards, and two, doesn't really realize that he's not a good person, because he's telling us right off the bat. So, we also know that he is arrogant, and does not think that he either can be judged, or should be judged for who he is or what he does. And that's just the first line. The next line finishes the first sentence and goes like this.
"Looking as if she were alive. I call that piece a wonder now."
This tells us that we were right. The Duchess is dead instead of divorced or something like that, which was a small possibility. Notice, too, the I call. Like I said earlier, the poem doesn't always join the structure of the poem, things like iambic pentameter and the rhyming couplets, to the beginning and end of sentences. Here we see that I call belongs to the next line, and most people who recite the poem join the I call with the third line, as you would in a conversation. So, we go,
"I call that piece a wonder now."
This undercuts some of our previous ideas. Maybe he did care for her. It's possible that he sees the artwork as keeping her alive still. But it is also possible that he values the artwork exactly as we thought he valued her, as something beautiful to be possessed, but not something that has any intrinsic value. Which interpretation is correct is unclear, so let's keep going. Browning next writes,
Frau Pandolf's hands worked busily a day, and there she stands.
This sentence, standing alone, doesn't really add to our assessment of how the speaker valued his duchess, but it does underscore what we already think. This man is obsessed with class, and he is arrogant. Though we may not know who Frau Pandolf is, we can safely assume that he is a famous painter who the speaker is name dropping in order to show his class to whomever he is speaking to.
Will it please you sit and look at her?
Here, we can look back to how we thought there were at least two possible interpretations of the sentence a few lines back.
I call that piece a wonder now.
Which interpretation is more likely now that the speaker has invited his guest to sit down and look at the painting? I think our second interpretation. The painting is likely not valuable to him because it reminds him of his beloved wife. Instead, he likely values it because it is a work of art by a distinguished artist. Put yourself in the shoes of someone who has lost a wife or husband. Would you brag about a painting of them to the point of having someone sit down to admire the workmanship? I think probably not. Okay, next sentence, and it's a long one.
I said Frau Pandolf by design, for never read strangers like you that pictured countenance, the depth and passion of its earnest glance, but to myself they turned, since none puts by the curtain I have drawn for you but I, and seemed as if they would ask me, if they durst, how such a glance came there. So, not the first are you to turn and ask thus.
There's a lot to unpack there, so let's go line by line.
I said Frau Pandolf by design.
He mentioned the name on purpose. We already kind of suspected that he said Frau Pandolf on purpose because he wanted to show the prestige of the creator of the work. But it turns out there's another reason. He wants the guest to know that he, the speaker, himself did not paint the portrait.
For never read strangers like you that pictured countenance, the depth and passion of its earnest glance.
Okay, something is up. That's an expression that means there's something we don't know that is going to influence us in the future. You might say, something's up, when you are about to rob a bank and the bank is empty when you enter. There's something going on that you don't know about. Here, we know something is up. Let's keep going.
But to myself they turned, since none puts by the curtain I have drawn for you but I.
Now we know that he keeps the painting covered behind a curtain and only allows others to look at it when he himself is the one showing the painting. That's a bit odd. Maybe he doesn't show it willy-nilly to people like we thought earlier. Maybe seeing her does make him feel sad. Maybe he isn't showing her off. If that's the case, why is he showing the picture to this stranger? How does he decide who to show it to? As of now, it's unclear. Next lines.
And seemed as if they would ask me, if they durst, how such a glance came there. So, not the first are you to turn and ask thus. Sir, 'twas not her husband's presence only called that spot of joy into the Duchess's cheek.
Okay, things are maybe a little clearer. He's embarrassed or angry about the look that Frau Pandolf captured on his Duchess's face, and her general demeanor while being painted. He thinks her flush should be reserved for him alone, and that's why he mentioned Frau Pandolf. He wants the guest to know that she is just out there, blushing for everybody. It's terrible. Also, let's take a step back. We have a pretty good idea of what kind of person the speaker is. He's arrogant, he sees women as objects, he wants his guests to respect him, he has a rigid view of the world. So, when he says that it seemed as if they would ask me, referring to his guests who looked at the picture and saw how well the painting captured the flush of the Duchess's cheek, I'm not so sure we can take this at face value. There's a possibility that the Duke is reading far too into the responses of those he shows the painting to. If that's true, then we're seeing something else: jealousy. He's jealous that he is not the only recipient of the Duchess's good graces. So, could she have been cheating on him? Is that why he hides the painting? Is this why he's so paranoid that others see her blushing for the artist as she's being painted? We don't know yet, but this is a new possibility.
Perhaps Frau Pandolf chanced to say, "Her mantle laps over my lady's wrist too much," or "Paint must never hope to reproduce the faint half-flush that dies along her throat." Such stuff was courtesy, she thought, and cause enough for calling up that spot of joy.
Okay, once again, we realize we were a little off base. Yes, he is jealous, but it doesn't seem like he's jealous because the Duchess is fond of cheating on him. He's jealous, it seems, precisely because she flushes too easily at simple courtesy, like generic lines that might have been said to her while she was being painted.
She had a heart, how shall I say, too soon made glad.
There it is. Here's the Duke's issue with his Duchess. She's too happy, too sweet, too kind. She treats everyone too well. She doesn't treat him best of all. This man is a psychopath. The poem goes on, with the Duke reciting all the things that the Duchess liked, such as riding her mule, or being given flowers, or sunsets.
She liked whate'er she looked on, and her looks went everywhere. Sir, 'twas all one, my favour at her breast, the dropping of the daylight in the west, the bough of cherries some officious fool broke in the orchard for her, the white mule she rode with round the terrace, all and each would draw from her alike the approving speech, or blush, at least. She thanked men, good, but thanked, somehow, I know not how, as if she ranked my gift of a 900-years-old name with anybody's gift.
It's all fine and well to thank people. Good, the Duke says, but she was not quite servile enough. He thinks that she should have gone out of her way to thank the Duke for his 900-years-old name, and with way more emotion than she thanked anyone else. With this reference to the 900-year-old name, we see again that the Duke is arrogant and treats the Duchess as an object. Yes, but we also see something new. She likely came from a less distinguished family. He is obsessed with class and sees himself as in a higher class than she was. All of her value now comes from him. How dare she, he's saying, give anyone even 1/10 of the gratitude she owes to him. The Duke goes on.
Who'd stoop to blame this sort of trifling?
Here, the Duke seems to recognize that his jealousy is beneath him. He recognizes that this is not a big deal. She's friendly and blushes easily.
Even had you skill in speech, which I have not, to make your will quite clear to such an one, and say, just this or that in you disgusts me. Here you miss or there exceed the mark, and if she let herself be lessoned so, nor plainly set her wits to yours, forsooth, and made excuse, e'en then would be some stooping, and I choose never to stoop.
Here we see the true horrible character of the Duke shine through. He's arrogant, but maybe we expect arrogance from a Duke. He treats titles as if they were the only way that a person can be judged, but again, we expect that of people with titles. They can be pompous. But here, the Duke confesses that he never even talked to his wife, the Duchess, about his unhappiness with how she reacted to those around her. His pride, his rigid desire to never stoop, to never act in a way that is beneath him, meant that he would never talk to her about how he is upset with the way she behaves. Even had you skill in speech, he says, and even if she let herself be lessoned so, still, he thinks, there would be stooping. In other words, even if she responded positively, said something like, "Oh, I had no idea my blushing or my kind words bothered you. I will be sure not to speak kindly to the lower class again, or blush. uh, Still, that would be him stooping, because he recognizes that the blushing and friendliness are not that big of a deal, normally. Let's move on, because the next lines seal the deal.
Oh, sir, she smiled, no doubt, whenever I passed her. But who passed without much the same smile? This grew. I gave commands. Then all smiles stopped together.
Rather than talking to his wife, rather than stooping, he has her killed. He didn't like the way she blushed and smiled, so he killed her. This man, again, is a psychopath. And he doesn't seem remorseful. He's telling a confessed stranger that he killed his wife and expects nothing to come of it.
There she stands, as if alive. Will it please you rise? We'll meet the company below, then. I repeat, the Count, your master's known munificence, is ample warrant that no just pretence of mine for dowry will be disallowed, though his fair daughter's self, as I avowed at starting, is my object.
Here, I think, we see why this poem is so famous. Browning has succeeded in creating a layered, ever-deepening horror story. Every few lines, he reveals something new that reworks everything that we have read up to that point. We finally realize that the Duke wasn't just reminiscing with a random guest. He just told this story to the servant of the man whose daughter the Duke is seeking to marry. Let's underline that. He just told someone close to the family of his future bride that he killed his last bride. And he has no fear of doing so. He does it matter-of-factly. He has absolutely no reason, somehow, to think that his revealing that he murdered his last wife will affect anything concerning his future. This is underscored by his last few lines.
Nay, we'll go together down, sir. Notice Neptune, though, taming a seahorse, thought a rarity, which Claus of Innsbruck cast in bronze for me.
He is so unworried, so unflustered, that he points out a separate art piece. Ah, yes, here's the portrait of the wife I murdered, and there's a statue I had made of Neptune. I didn't murder Neptune, ha ha ha, but I might, ha ha ha. And in doing so, he removes once again the humanity of his last Duchess, and she becomes just another painting on the wall. Of course, Browning layers in more. The reference to Neptune taming a horse might represent what the Duke himself sees himself doing to his future Duchess, and the reference to Claus of Innsbruck, another artist the Duke name drops, likely underscores the Duke's obsession with showing people the value of his collections and his association with class. But I think the main goal of Browning here is to show that the Duke doesn't value his duchesses as human beings. They are objects to be collected and thrown away if need be.